I want you to try a little thought experiment with me today.
Okay, I'm game.
Imagine you are walking through the streets of a major, bustling global metropolis, a really big city.
Right.
The energy is palpable, the traffic is moving, people are rushing to work.
Just a standard Tuesday morning rush.
Exactly. But then you turn a corner, and suddenly the landscape shifts completely, dramatically. On your left, you see the glittering glass and steel of a brand-new financial district. Buildings practically scraping the clouds. They exude wealth, technological advancement, and immense economic power.
The modern skyline.
Yeah. But then, you look to your right. Just a stone's throw away, separated maybe by a single highway or a narrow river, is a sprawling expanse of extreme poverty.
Wow.
Makeshift housing, struggling infrastructure, just a completely different, much harsher reality.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast.
It is. And when you see that extreme wealth right next to extreme poverty, what is your first assumption? Do you assume it's just a tragic accident of circumstance?
Like a geographical fluke.
Right, exactly. But what if that persistent poverty isn't bad luck, or some individual's failure, but the perfectly predictable outcome of a system operating exactly as it was designed?
That is a profoundly unsettling question to sit with, honestly.
It really is.
Because we are conditioned to look at that juxtaposition and feel pity or perhaps frustration, but we rarely look at it and see a functioning, intentional mechanism at work.
No, we don't.
Society at large tends to view poverty as an anomaly, a breakdown in the system rather than an active, continuous product of it.
Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world.
And today we are doing a deep dive into a really paradigm-shifting piece of work.
We are. We're exploring Reframing Poverty, New Thinking and Feeling About Humanity's Greatest Challenge by Eric Meade.
It's a fantastic source.
It is. Rather than treating poverty as an isolated humanitarian issue, Meade invites us to reconsider the underlying systems that shape how entire societies interpret and ultimately respond to economic hardship.
Which is such a vital shift in perspective.
Entire societies often treat poverty as an unfortunate accident of circumstance. But we are going to look at what happens when you treat persistent poverty as a predictable outcome of systems designed around particular incentives.
The mission of this deep dive really requires us to shift our analytical baseline.
How so?
Well, at first glance, poverty often appears as a problem of mere scarcity, a lack of resources, a lack of jobs or opportunities.
The standard economic view.
Right. But Meade argues that understanding poverty actually requires examining how our perception itself is structured.
The way we see it.
Exactly. The way societies conceptualize poverty inherently shapes what solutions seem possible, and crucially, what realities remain completely invisible to us.
So we are looking at the global perception framework surrounding poverty today.
Yes, which includes narratives, institutions, development models, and the emotional assumptions that influence how people interpret inequality.
Before we really jump into the deep end here, I want to make something very clear to you, our listener.
Yeah, this is an important caveat.
Exploring systemic economic frameworks and dissecting how societies structure wealth and poverty, it inherently touches on politically charged concepts.
Absolutely. People have deeply held beliefs about economics, personal responsibility, institutional structures.
They do. So in this deep dive, we are not taking a left-wing or right-wing stance.
Not at all.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints or the political implications of the source material. Our job today is to impartially unpack Eric Meade's structural arguments so that you can fully understand the original source material yourself.
We're here to map the mechanics of his ideas, not to tell you how to vote or what economic philosophy to adopt.
Exactly. We are acting as your guides through Meade's analytical framework. We just want to provide you with the tools to understand this specific lens on the world so you can evaluate its mechanics critically.
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's unpack this. We should start with the visual anchor of this entire concept.
The book cover.
Yes, the cover image of Eric Meade's book itself. It perfectly encapsulates the crisis we are talking about here.
It's a very striking image.
It is. The image is split horizontally into two distinct worlds. In the immediate foreground, taking up the bottom half of the cover, is a dense, sprawling, informal settlement.
The slum.
Right. You see rusted corrugated metal roofs. The buildings are dilapidated, tightly packed together. They're clearly lacking modern infrastructure. The colors are earthy reds, browns, the rust of aging material.
Very grounded, very raw.
Yeah. But looming directly behind it, occupying the exact same geographic space, is a gleaming, ultra-modern skyline.
Massive skyscrapers.
Huge ones. Towering construction cranes perched on top of half-built high-rises. It signals this aggressive march of rapid urban development.
What's fascinating here is that the standard narrative of human progress, the one embedded in classical economic theory, suggests that as cities develop, poverty is naturally eradicated.
Right, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Exactly. Economic development is framed as a linear progression. According to that narrative, you shouldn't see a slum directly beneath a brand new skyscraper.
It shouldn't exist.
Right. The slum should have been absorbed or replaced by the prosperity that built the skyscraper in the first place.
The narrative assumes the foreground is a before picture and the background is an after picture.
Yes.
But this image proves that modern systems possess the capacity to generate extraordinary, unprecedented prosperity and deep, grinding deprivation simultaneously.
At the exact same time.
In the exact same place.
That proximity is the crucial aha moment of Meade's visual evidence. The proximity demands an explanation that goes beyond simple resource scarcity.
Because resources are clearly there.
Exactly. If a city has the engineering capability, the capital, and the supply chains to erect a dozen state-of-the-art skyscrapers, it clearly possesses the material resources to provide basic sanitation and housing.
Obviously.
So the fact that the slum persists in the shadow of the skyscraper means the continued existence of the slum is a problem of systemic allocation, and fundamentally a problem of perception.
I want you to think about your own nearest metropolis for a second. Think about the tech booms in San Francisco occurring blocks away from the deep deprivation of the Tenderloin. Or the luxury high-rises in London pushing right up against neglected public housing estates.
It's everywhere.
It is. And we tend to compartmentalize those two experiences geographically and cognitively. We treat them as separate worlds.
But Meade forces us to recognize they are part of the exact same local economy.
The same political jurisdiction.
The same interconnected ecosystem. The wealth of the skyscraper and the poverty of the slum are co-generated.
Co-generated, that is such a powerful word. Which brings us to Meade's core concept, the architecture of perception.
This is where we get into the real mechanics of the book.
Right. This system of perception is not just an economic model.
No, not at all. It is a complex, invisible architecture built from cultural narratives, institutional models, political rhetoric, and deeply held emotional assumptions.
It's how we see reality.
It is the lens through which a society collectively decides what is normal, what is acceptable, and what is inevitable.
And the design of this system begins with how poverty is framed in the public consciousness, doesn't it?
Yes. In almost all public discourse, poverty is framed as an individual condition.
We hear narratives focused on behavior all the time, like this person needs a job.
Or this family needs financial literacy.
Or this specific community needs our charity.
It is a classic manifestation of what psychologists call the fundamental attribution error.
Can you explain that briefly?
Sure. It's our tendency to overemphasize personal characteristics and ignore situational factors when judging other people's behavior.
If someone else fails, it's their fault.
Exactly. And the consequence of this individual framing is profound. By hyper-focusing on localized individual behaviors or by limiting societal response to temporary individualized assistance, the broader institutional and structural dynamics that actually produce the inequality remain completely outside the frame of public consciousness.
They become invisible.
Right. If poverty is seen purely as an individual failure, the overarching system that dictates wages, land ownership, healthcare access, and wealth distribution is entirely absolved of responsibility.
Let's ground this in a concrete analogy to make it a bit clearer. Imagine a specific model of a car that continually stalls on the highway.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
If we applied the individual framing of poverty to this car, we would spend all our time analyzing the driver's habits.
Right. Are they shifting gears correctly?
Exactly. We'd observe that they aren't accelerating smoothly, or they didn't read the manual thoroughly. We might even set up a roadside assistance charity to tow them when they break down.
A towing charity.
Right. But we are completely ignoring the fact that the manufacturer designed the engine with a faulty fuel injector.
The engine is fundamentally broken.
Yes.
And if you are a mechanic whose perception is constrained by the belief that all car problems are caused by bad drivers, you will never issue a factory recall.
Never.
You will never even look at the engine. Meade's argument is that our societal perception of poverty is trapped in exactly this paradigm.
We're blaming the drivers.
We treat poverty as a localized anomaly to be managed, rather than a systemic output to be redesigned.
So a huge question emerges here. How does this flawed framing stay in place? Why do we keep blaming the driver?
The answer lies in the architecture of incentives.
Incentives drive everything.
They really do. Different powerful societal tillers are heavily incentivized to maintain the current perception framework. Let's break down these pillars, starting with governments.
Okay, let's look at the government level. Governments generally operate on macro-level metrics. Historically, they prioritize broad economic growth indicators.
Gross domestic product.
GDP, yeah. Or the sheer volume of foreign investment in real estate development.
Governments are incentivized to maximize those top-line numbers because that is how political success and global economic standing are defined.
If the GDP goes up, the politicians say they did a good job.
Right. But these broad metrics actively mask underlying inequality. For instance, consider how GDP is calculated locally. A city can rezone a working-class neighborhood to allow for luxury condominium development.
We see this all the time. Gentrification.
Exactly. The construction, the sale of the land, and the eventual high-priced transactions all contribute massively to local GDP.
The dashboard flashes green. The city looks incredibly successful on paper.
But the reality on the ground is that the original residents are priced out, their rent increases, and they are pushed into more precarious housing situations.
Perhaps moving into the very informal settlements we saw on Meade's book cover.
Often, yes, total wealth increases, but it concentrates within particular geographic or institutional networks.
The wealth doesn't spread.
No. But because the government's primary perception framework is built around aggregate growth, the displacement and the persistence of the slum are treated as minor lagging indicators.
Or just inevitable externalities.
Right, rather than a fundamental failure of the economic model.
It's the illusion of a rising tide lifting all boats, when in reality, it's just lifting the yachts while the rowboats are taking on water.
That's a great way to put it.
But this brings us to the organizations whose entire stated purpose is to help the people in the rowboats.
The NGOs.
Right. Development organizations, charities, and non-governmental organizations. If governments are focused on GDP, NGOs are focused on poverty. Yet Meade argues they are also caught in this architecture of incentives.
They absolutely are. NGOs are entirely beholden to how they are funded.
Donors.
Donors, whether wealthy individuals, philanthropic foundations, or government grants, they require measurable proof of return on their investment.
They want to see what their money bought.
This creates an incentive structure where development models must measure their success through quantifiable short-term outputs.
Things you can put on a spreadsheet.
Exactly. How many meals were served, how many mosquito nets were distributed, how many microloans were approved.
But these are outputs, not outcomes.
There is a massive difference.
There is. Providing 100 beds in a shelter is an output. An outcome is a housing market and a wage structure, where 100 people don't require a charitable shelter to survive in the first place.
Because NGOs must produce these outputs to secure their next grant cycle, they are structurally forced to treat the symptoms of poverty rather than the root causes.
Because symptoms are highly measurable.
You can count a bed, you can count a meal.
Right.
But systemic change, like dismantling systemic wage suppression or reforming exclusionary land tenure laws, that takes generations.
And it's incredibly difficult to quantify on an annual donor report.
Exactly. So the development sector inadvertently becomes an industry of symptom management.
Wow. An industry of symptom management.
It alleviates immediate, crushing pain, which is absolutely necessary, of course.
We aren't saying charities are bad.
No, not at all. But it operates entirely within the existing perception framework.
Let's look at a historical case study that illustrates this perfectly. I think it really grounds the concept. Take the massive influx of donated clothing to sub-Saharan Africa from Western charities over the past few decades.
This is a classic example in development economics.
Right. The output was highly measurable. Millions of tons of free clothing provided to people in need. It felt like a massive philanthropic success for the donors.
But the outcome was completely different.
Yes. The outcome was the near-total destruction of localized textile industries in countries like Ghana and Kenya.
Because local tailors and manufacturers simply couldn't compete with free imported goods.
How could they? The charitable intervention treated a symptom, a lack of clothing, but structurally damaged the local economic engine that could have provided sustainable employment and wages.
That is a prime example of how treating symptoms without analyzing systemic impacts can perpetuate the very economic stagnation the charity seeks to solve.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
It is. And this brings us to the third pillar in this architecture.
The
The media narratives play a massive role in shaping how the public perceives these interventions and the nature of poverty itself.
media's primary incentive is engagement. capturing human attention to drive subscriptions, ratings, or ad revenue.
And the algorithmic reality is that human attention is reliably captured by dramatic, emotional, highly personalized narratives.
We engage with stories of individual triumph or individual tragedy much more readily than we engage with data on structural zoning laws.
Dry data doesn't get clicks.
No, it doesn't. When media covers poverty, they are incentivized to find the most emotionally wrenching individual examples.
They highlight a hardworking single mother facing eviction, or feature a crowdfunding campaign for someone who can't afford life-saving healthcare.
They individualize the systemic failure.
While these stories are entirely true and they absolutely deserve empathy, the aggregate consequence of this media narrative is really problematic.
It completely overlooks the slow, quiet, systemic processes that maintain these disparities.
It trains the audience to view poverty as an episodic emergency, something requiring a heroic, individualized rescue like a viral donation campaign.
Rather than a structural failure requiring systemic reform.
Right. It keeps the public emotionally engaged with the symptoms while remaining entirely blind to the systems.
Here is where systems theory becomes really essential for understanding Meade's work.
Yes, let's bring systems theory into this.
When you take the government prioritizing aggregate GDP, NGOs focusing on short-term measurable outputs, and the media hyper-focusing on emotional individual stories, you create robust feedback loops.
Feedback loops are critical here.
A feedback loop occurs when the outputs of a system are circled back and used as inputs, fundamentally stabilizing and reinforcing the pattern.
Let's trace one of these feedback loops explicitly. I think it helps to see how it stabilizes the pattern of the skyscraper and the slum.
Let's do it.
Consider a large corporate developer building that brand new financial district we talked about earlier. They might receive massive tax breaks from the local government. That is an input designed to boost GDP.
Make the city attractive to business.
Right. Now, the output is enormous localized wealth for the developer.
They make a huge profit.
They do. Then they take a fraction of that wealth and cycle it back as an input. They fund political lobbying to maintain the low-tax environment.
Keeping the cycle going.
And crucially, they simultaneously create a philanthropic foundation.
The PR move.
That foundation then distributes grants to local NGOs to run food banks and homeless shelters in the very neighborhoods that have seen their social safety nets defunded due to the eroded tax base.
Because the developer didn't pay taxes.
Exactly. And then the media covers the developer's philanthropic ribbon-cutting ceremony, framing them as a civic hero.
The loop is closed.
It's perfectly sealed.
The structural disparity persists across generations. Because the worst of the suffering is being managed by the NGO, the government gets its skyline, the media gets its heartwarming story, and the underlying incentives of the broader economy are never forced to change.
The system essentially grants itself a moral license to continue operating exactly as it is.
This reveals a really profound paradox of institutions from the source material.
It's one of the most striking points Meade makes.
The very organizations responsible for addressing poverty are often deeply embedded within and financially dependent upon the exact same economic structures that produce the inequality.
Because society delegates the poverty problem to targeted charities while protecting the broader economic engine, we are actively treating symptoms in a way that sustains the system.
We're keeping the engine running while wiping off the grease.
Exactly.
If this interconnected machine is constantly generating wealth for the skyscrapers and deprivation for the slums, it begs a huge question.
Who is responsible?
Yeah, who do we point the finger at?
This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of Meade's framework to really internalize. Poverty continues not because of a single malicious actor or some centralized conspiracy.
There's no villain in a smoky back room.
No, it continues because the mechanisms generating it are incredibly distributed.
Distributed persistence.
Yes. Responsibility is spread across global trade agreements, local urban planning, tax codes, exclusionary zoning laws, and our own cultural narratives that equate wealth with moral virtue.
When a problem is everywhere, it can feel like it is nowhere.
Exactly. Because the blame is so distributed, no single entity feels the immediate burning responsibility to dismantle the architecture.
The developer points to the government points to the market. The market is just an abstract concept.
It is an emergent property of all these aligned incentives.
So what does this all mean for us? What is the actual crisis in perception that Meade is identifying?
Well, the crisis emerges when a society interprets a deeply structural phenomenon purely through an individual lens.
Our collective vision is misaligned with reality.
Completely. When attention is monopolized by individual symptoms, the failing driver in our car analogy, the deeper architecture of inequality, the faulty manufacturing of the engine, remains unchallenged.
And unchanged.
The crisis in perception is that our current way of seeing poverty limits the solutions we are even capable of imagining.
We can't fix what we can't see.
If we only see the need for a better funded homeless shelter, we struggle to imagine or demand a housing market that doesn't produce homelessness as a byproduct of its normal functioning.
Meade is pointing toward a necessary paradigm shift,
A massive one.
moving away from asking solely, how do we reduce suffering in this specific localized community?
To asking a much bigger question.
Right. How do our collective frameworks of perception shape the limited solutions we are even capable of imagining?
Systems analysis reveals that poverty is not simply a humanitarian issue or a tragic accident. It is a structural outcome produced by complex institutional arrangements operating across economic, political, and cultural domains.
Understanding those arrangements is the only way to comprehend why poverty persists despite decades of global attention, massive charitable infrastructure, and the generation of immense global wealth.
It's the only way to truly see the system.
We've covered vital ground today. We analyzed the visual evidence of simultaneous extremes, the slum coexisting with the skyscraper.
Proving that wealth and poverty are co-generated by our modern systems.
We unpacked how society individualizes poverty to avoid confronting systemic engines. The fundamental attribution error.
The driver instead of the engine.
Right. We mapped the incentives of government metrics, NGO funding cycles, and algorithmic media narratives that actively maintain this blind spot.
And we explored how feedback loops sustain the architecture of perception, keeping us focused on managing symptoms rather than redesigning structures. I'll leave you with a final thought to explore on your own.
Please do.
If the systems we've discussed today rely on our individual emotional responses, our preference for manageable charity over disruptive structural change to maintain themselves, then the most radical act isn't just to donate to a cause.
What is it?
It is to fundamentally rewire what you allow yourself to perceive as normal in your own city. If you stop seeing poverty as an accident, how does that change who you hold accountable tomorrow?
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
Geez.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
We appreciate all the support.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
It's a great companion piece.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.